Hey everybody, hope you're all having a good day. Today's going to be another one of those rambling videos where I just talk about some stuff unscripted that's on my mind. In this one, I just wanted to take some time to discuss what happened during the play-ins and just give some brief thoughts about every single team and some of the matches that happened and everything, but also, and more importantly, we have to get kind of hyped up here for the playoffs because they're looking pretty darn good. Really exciting stuff. Apologies if this is a little all over the place, but that's just how it goes. I want to give some unfiltered opinions in real time, so let's get right into it by talking about the play-ins. So honestly, there were some ups and there were some downs. Some of those games weren't the best, but we also had some pretty amazing results. The big time storylines, of course, come through the Philly Fusion and Washington Justice somehow, someway, making it through the play-ins and qualifying for the playoffs despite their very up and down year full of disappointments. I touched on this briefly on my Twitter. If you're not following me, you definitely should. Shameless plug. But it's just very interesting to me that these two teams who disappointed and played under their expectations and potential all year suddenly just clicked. It's like they didn't care about the regular season and they just wanted to get to the playoffs almost. I guess the stakes just weren't high enough for them. Maybe some teams just need that extra pressure. They need to know that everything is on the line in this one game for them to truly perform at the level you'd expect them to. I mean, this is storybook level stuff. You gotta give credit to the quote-unquote script writers for this one because that's amazing. 2 redemption arcs basically played out in just a couple of days. Credit goes where it's due. Despite all of the nonsense that happened throughout the entire year, all of the criticisms, all of the crazy failures that happened, they found a way to get it done. I think that all of the main playmakers on both Philly and the Justice gave us a really good show. On the side of APAC, I really got to give a big time shout out to Carpe because for any of you who've been following this league for years, you would know that Profit has kind of tormented Carpe in the big playoff games throughout their entire careers basically. While Profit has been winning championships both in Apex and in the Overwatch League, Carpe basically has nothing to his name aside from that World Cup title where he did not have to go through Profit. The last time Carpe came out on top against Profit in their quote-unquote rivalry in some sort of big game was probably Stage 2 of 2018. That was the last significant victory I can think of. In all the other big games, Profit has usually been the person to come out on top. You have the 2018 Grand Finals, where London basically rolled all over Philly, especially in that second set of the series. Then you have what happened in the playoffs last year. Profit has just never gone away. He's been a nuisance for Carpe their entire careers. So just take a moment to think about how good this must feel for Carpe. His confidence is most likely through the roof right now. Profit is out of his way. He himself eliminated him from the playoffs while essentially outplaying him. Carpe played fantastic both in the Spark game and the one against the Dynasty. He was player of the match in the Dynasty one. I don't remember about the Spark, but he was there. He showed up when he needed to, which is something that people have gotten on him for in the past, so good on him. The Fusion in general, though, they really stepped up. I gotta admit, it wasn't just Carpe. I thought that Hoppa had a lot of great moments, and that's saying something. He's kind of having his own redemption arc of sorts. Then I think Mono, he was very consistent. Alarm and Funny Astro, they were both insane. I thought that both Shockwave and EQO contributed as well. It was a nice all-around team effort from a team who has dealt with a lot this year. This is the perfect time for them to figure things out because, as I've been saying time after time on this channel, the Fusion are extremely momentum-based. When they hit a mental barrier, pretty much anybody can defeat them. But on the other hand, when they aren't dealing with any mental adversity, they are extremely hard to stop, and they're basically capable of defeating anybody in this league. That could mean we are in for some upsets in this tournament, and that some of these higher-seeded teams should look out for the Fusion and take them seriously. More on the Fusion and their matchup with the Gladiators in the first round in a little bit. As for now, let us shift gears over to their counterpart, the Washington Justice, over in North America. Looking back at it, their seasons really are extremely comparable. Both of them had pretty high expectations coming into this year, I would say, just to never make a single regular season tournament. The Justice in particular, I think a lot of people were high on. Not everybody. I did see a lot of people say they were turned off by the Bebe and closer support line and whatnot, but I would say a bunch of this community was pretty hyped about the Justice. They thought they'd be even better than the Fusion for that matter. I myself believed they'd be like a top 3 team in the league and that they'd make a somewhat deep playoff run this year, but up until recently, they weren't giving me much evidence to back up that claim. They had a few good stages here and there where they looked competitive and they were making runs and they had an opportunity to at least make it to Hawaii, but they also had some really bad stages in between with hero pools. They seemed pretty mediocre during the June Joust, and then things got really bad during the Countdown Cup. I mean, they basically hit rock bottom as they got 3-0'd on 3 separate occasions and had to rely on the Titans just to not go winless in that stage. Their inconsistencies were very worrying, and I didn't have much faith in them at all to make it out of the play-ins, just like with the Fusion. How on earth could I rely on a team who just couldn't figure out certain metas at times and was struggling with their support line here and there? It just didn't make a lot of sense to trust in them at this point in the year because they kept letting me down time after time. They lost a bunch of games that you'd think they'd win. Did I think they could end up winning the play-ins? Yeah, sure. But again, I didn't have much faith in them. My trust had basically just been non-existent at that point. So then they come in and look really good in their first matchup against the Paris Eternal. Then they just do enough to beat the Outlaws afterwards, and I was left fairly impressed. I thought that the team as a whole looked a lot more confident in themselves, maybe because hero pools are gone or whatever, and Closer could play the Lucio. He looked a lot more comfortable. Mag looked comfortable playing the Winston and the Reinhardt. The team just seemed a lot happier. And let's not forget that Decay, he went on a rampage as usual. Playoff Decay is back in full form. He looked fantastic in both matches. I don't know what it is about Decay and the Justice going on these magical late season runs. You know what? Scratch that. Actually, the Justice franchise in particular, just for whatever reason, likes to do this every single year. And this dates all the way back to 2019, before they even decided to go full Korean. They didn't have any of the players on the current team that you see. Like, we're talking Corey and Stratus, all of those guys. They made that magical run happen in Stage 4 of 2019. Obviously, it didn't mean much because they were already eliminated from the playoffs at that point, but my point still stands. Then, of course, last year, we saw what happened with the Justice there, where they signed Decay right before the playoffs started, then somehow made it all the way to losers finals. And now here we are, yet again, this year in 2021, and we're seeing the same magic yet again. It's really annoying, but better late than never to step up your game, I suppose. And now, because of that, they're basically in the same sort of light as their APAC counterparts. The Justice are somebody you need to take seriously. I obviously don't have my full trust back in them just yet because, it's just 1 week. Anything can happen afterwards. They could suck in the playoffs for all I know, but playoff decay and Justice is a real thing that you have to be concerned about and you have to give them respect. If not, you might be getting sent home early. This Justice team, despite what might have happened with their inconsistency issues, are very experienced in these types of situations. Decay, last year, he went on a playoff run. Fury, for crying out loud, is a Grand Finals champion and a World Cup champion. Closer and Bebe, same thing. Closer was part of the London Spitfire in 2018, and I believe he won an Apex title on GC Busan. And then Bebe, he, even though hasn't really won anything, was on that Spark team who went to the Final Four back in 2019. And I mean, even the Washington rookies have a lot of experience in these types of scenarios, and I think we saw that play out against both the Outlaws and the Paris Eternal. They had that experience factor going for them. While I'm on the topic of Assassin, I think I probably owe him an apology. He really showed up big time during the weekend. I thought he played insane against the Outlaws. His Sombra looked great. I thought he was a very proactive Sombra player. He did a good job of denying Dante and making his life really hard by destroying his translocator and just getting good value out of his EMPs and everything. The problem is, we know Assassin can do this. We've seen these types of performances in the past already. The issue is he can't do it very consistently, and for every good performance he has like 1 or 2 bad ones in return. So now it's a matter of finding that consistency and playing like this every single game, because I'm telling you right now, the Justice are not going to go far if he can't step up. He has to play like this every single time. He can't be making those silly mistakes. He's got to bring his A game. I promise you, he is like the X factor basically for the Justice. We know Decay is going to show up. We know Fury is going to show up. We know that Mag is likely going to show up. So Assassin has to do his thing. If he does, let me tell you, the Justice will be terrifying to deal with. They will be annoying and they could cause a lot of ruckus and surprises in this tournament bracket. The Justice and Fusion are basically on the same boat, where they seem to be heading towards that upward trajectory, but you can never be too sure just because of their inconsistencies. I want to say both of them are in a good spot, but I also know that it would be very, very smart to watch them at least another couple of games heading into the playoffs before making that decision. But all I'm saying is, on paper, they're both in a pretty decent spot. They both seem to really like this meta, which is great for them. They both have options. That's the thing to think about. The Fusion, they seem to really like the Wrecking Ball and the Winston dive, but also the Orisa. Then the Justice, they like dive, we know that, they love the Winston, but also they're getting a lot of value out of the Reinhardt Rush. Overall, they're both demonstrating versatility, which is exactly what you need if you want to make a playoff run in this kind of meta where a lot of things are technically viable currently. Both of these guys are somebody we need to monitor heading into the playoffs because, again, there's a lot of upset potential there and there's some big time storylines to follow. We'll talk more about the Fusion and the Justice in a bit. For now, though, let's quickly talk about the San Francisco Shock, who, to the surprise of probably not many, ended up making it through the play-ins. They only had to play one game. They're the highest seed, so they had the privilege, I would say, of not having to go through the Washington Justice this time around, so good on them. This was probably the best case scenario for the Shock because Toronto was able to advance past Boston, so that was an easy choice for them. They've had Toronto's number not just this year, but in general throughout their entire history. They've literally never lost to Toronto before, so that was an easy choice and an easy win overall. Did the Shock look insane? No, I wouldn't go that far, but they looked confident out there. They looked happy. They knew what they were doing. It was kind of close at times, but they definitely were in control throughout, so good for them. I think the standout thing here is they have a lot of versatility as well. It plays up to a lot of their main tank strengths. They can play super for Ryan, but also Smurf on Winston, which is fantastic for them. And they seem to be reincorporating FD got into the lineup, which is interesting because it seemed like for a while they weren't happy with what he was doing, but now it makes sense because they can play the Lucio again, but also they have him playing Brig and he looked okay. That in turn is really great for the flex supports on this roster. Now Violet and Twilight, they can focus more just on the things that they specialize in, that they're the best at. They don't have to worry about the responsibilities of Brigitte and whatnot. They can leave that to FD God and focus on their Annas and their Zens and their Baps. Again, take this with a grain of salt because they only beat a mid-tier opponent, but we saw firsthand how that worked out for them when they were able to utilize the correct support combination. But if you ask me, there was less overall confusion going on with that support line, and because of that, those flex supports were able to focus a bit more on their playmaking and making an overall difference. Twilight in particular, I thought he had some really good biotic grenades on the Ana when he was in the game, and I expect that to continue for both Violet and Twilight. They're going to make a lot of nice plays, even against stronger opponents, because they really are world-class players. So generally speaking, I was happy with what the Shock showed me, but I wasn't entirely surprised with most things they did. I thought they were going to beat Toronto pretty easily. The big thing for me, the big takeaway was what they were doing with the support line. That's a really great sign for them moving into the playoffs. But of course, their first playoff matchup isn't exactly an easy one, playing against the Dragons. We'll talk more on that later, but just keep it in mind for now. For the time being, I quickly wanted to breeze through all of the other play-in teams who did not make it through the bracket. Let's start with the APAC region. Losing in round number 1 was the Hangzhou Spark, and that wasn't a surprise to basically any of us, I would say, just because they weren't in the greatest situation. The biggest issue that comes to mind for me, at least, is the coaching situation. We've talked about it here on the channel before, but they've basically been playing musical chairs the entire year. They've had no stability at their head coaching position whatsoever, and that's going to mess you up. I don't care how much talent you may be boasting on your team. None of it is going to matter if there's no one there to organize it and help those guys get where they need to be. Coaching is really important. I'm not saying they would have made it through the play-ins or would have went on some sort of crazy playoff run or anything like that, but I think if the Spark had a more stable coaching situation, they would have won a few more games at the very least, and then maybe be in a few more runnings for the regular season tournaments. But instead, here they are, faltering to the surprise of pretty much nobody at all. On the other hand, though, aside from that, I think that the whole MCD drama really did take its toll, not only because MCD was really toxic and everything, but also because they miss him as a playmaker. He was one of their better players on the team, one of the better Ana players in the league, I would say, really good Zen, just really strong flex support overall, and I think that not having him there really did cost them. It was a point of emphasis I had when talking about my predictions last week, where instead they have to rely on basically their plan B at support. There's nothing wrong with Mika and Coldest. I like them both. They have a lot of good synergy with one another, and they both have a lot of potential, but they just haven't played all that much this year. And I think we saw that play out with Coldest in particular. It might not have always been his fault, but a lot of those nanos onto Gushue were just very, very poorly timed. I mean, they were just so off. I don't know if it was on Gushue, on him, or both of them even, but oh my. There were so many different occasions where Gushue would go in, he'd get nanoed, but he'd be nowhere near the backline or any sort of enemy, so he'd get zero value out of it. In the first half of that series, the game was pretty close. It wasn't like it was very one-sided. I think the second half of that series, by that point, the Spark were kind of just mentally boomed, but in the first half, they were hanging in there. They won the first map, and they very well could have won Volskaya had they not crumbled all of a sudden out of nowhere. And I think a lot of that has to do with some poor coordination between the supports and the rest of the team. Volskaya was so winnable. I mean, oh my god, the fact that they were just playing for a draw and they lost that map, it's mind-blowing to me because they were in a great position to take it. But I suppose that is how the cookie crumbles when your situation is not stable in the slightest. Hopefully the Spark can figure that out heading into Season 5 because there's so much potential. They have a lot of great stars on this team, guys like Shai and Gushue. They're absolutely amazing, so I'd like to see the Spark put out a better product next year. Speaking of better product, let's talk about the Seoul Dynasty. Yeah, they did it again, huh? Another disappointing game in one of the major matches of their season. And of course, with this one being for the sake of the playoffs, this one hurts the most, and I can't even blame Seoul fans for being frustrated because that was a tough game to watch. They had gotten in Philly's head at that point. They had beaten them 2 times in a row. They were denying them left and right, but then when it mattered the most, they did not come in with a very good game plan at all. I find it very, very interesting that Marvel was suddenly the starting player for them. I get it, sometimes stuff just doesn't work out the way you think it would in Scrim, so you have to come up with a different plan. Maybe Marvel was just a better option, Gesture was burned out, etc., etc. But it just seems weird to me to have Marvel be the starting main tank. I don't really get it. And that is coming from a Marvel supporter. I love this guy in the main tank role. I have been praising him since 2019 when he was a rookie. I love his Winston. I love his Reinhardt. He's a great main tank. And even for the first map, I would say it made sense to play him because they wanted to play a lot of Rein. His Rein is a lot better than Gestures. It makes sense. But after that, I don't really understand. Seoul wanted to play a lot of Orisa to match the fusion, and they're playing Winston as well, and both of those roles are good things for Gesture, and we saw how great he looked during the Countdown Cup. I would say he was kind of revitalizing his career in a way. It was the best he had looked in a very long time, in my opinion. So to see him just sit on the bench instead for whatever the reason, that came as a surprise to me. Think about how it affects Prophet, too. I'm sure not having his reliable partner in crime in the playoffs with him is a little strange, and it made it a bit harder for him. I would argue Prophet and Gesture are an inseparable duo at this point. They've done everything together. All of their biggest achievements, they have been on the same roster. They won Apex together. They were both pivotal contributors, both in their 2018 Grand Finals victory and their 2020 playoff run. So now to suddenly get rid of one half of that puzzle, I don't know, man. Seems a little risky and just bizarre. But it wasn't just this poor decision that really had me shaking my head. I also think that Seoul in general had a tough time keeping up with Philly in the metagame. And what I mean by that is a lot of the time, their composition choices were very poorly timed and they were making the incorrect ones. It all started right off the bat on Busan when they overcommitted to that Pharah on the first round and we saw the fusion just absolutely decimate it. This overcommitment happened more than once throughout the series. Then at other points, they were going for the mirror match when they really shouldn't have, but then on the other hand, when they should be going for the mirror match at times, they don't. It was a really weird position that they were in and I just felt like every step of the way, them and their coaching and everybody involved was making the wrong choice. Speaking of their coaching, I kind of assumed that they'd make the right choices this time around just because they have been a more consistent team this year. It's not like the same 2020 team where they're always making those weird choices and going on these random cold streaks. They'd been pretty good throughout the whole year, but I was wrong to trust in their coaching staff. I was wrong. I admit it. I thought they were past this because of their more consistent results, but no, that wasn't the case at all. And now, as we've seen on social media, a lot of people are calling for the Seoul coaching to change drastically, and I can't blame any fans out there for wanting this. It makes a lot of sense. These inconsistencies and poor knowledge of the meta just has to stop. They have to find the right coach, the right guy, because if they can, they'll be able to take a step forward. It's just disappointing, man. Seoul had a lot of ups this year. They really did. There were a lot of times where I was really happy with them, and I was pleasantly surprised, if anything. I didn't think they were going to be this good this year. They put out a really good product. Fitz and Prophet, they were both like MVP level players, you know, and the rest of the team, they followed in suit. They were great, but anytime they played a meaningful match, they crumbled. It didn't matter what the stage was, what the stakes were. Anytime there was a big time matchup on hand, they were losing. It's disappointing to see a 12-win team only do this much because we know they can do way more than this. They had so many different chances to potentially make it to Hawaii and get some bonus points, or even just beating Chengdu during the Countdown Cup would have helped them get that second place spot and avoid these play-ins altogether. So many missed opportunities, seriously. Really, really sad stuff. Of course, though, this kind of happens in every sports league. It's not just the Overwatch League, and it happens every single year where you have this type of team who just can't win when it truly matters. Seoul just happened to be that victim this year. It's a shame, yes, but what can you do? Okay, but how about we move over to the NA teams now? I think that's enough talking about the Seoul Dynasty. I'm sure some of you are probably a little annoyed at me at this point, so we'll talk about some of these NA teams who got eliminated, starting with the Boston Uprising. I think for some fans, their end is a little disappointing disappointing. Going out 3-0 like that to Toronto is a bit sad just because that was a kind of winnable matchup, I would say. Not one you're necessarily expected to win by everybody, but one you could have won nonetheless. But hey, here's how I see it. This was still the best showing from this franchise in years. I would say since the inaugural season, at least from like a win percentage standpoint and winning big games. In my opinion, Boston's performance should be considered a job well done because this was supposed to just be a building block year for them, really. It was the first year of turning a new page. So the fact that they qualified for the plans and had multiple 3-1 tournament qualifiers is worthy of praise. Again, I think most fans would have liked to see them put up a better fight in a losing effort during their final game of the season, but they should all be very happy with how their team played. You had some pretty satisfying moments like when you upset Houston and the Justice that one time. There were some good times, and on top of that, there were some great showings from some of these players. I think that Valentine, he had a pretty good rookie campaign. I'm37 looked decent at times in his redemption story, if you'd like to say. I thought that Myungbong looked great as usual. Faith, I think him and as well as Punk had pretty underrated years, both really solid looking players. There's a lot of good building blocks to look forward to heading into next year. Some work has to be done though, because that consistency factor isn't the greatest, but my counter argument there is they weren't supposed to have it all figured out this year because again, it's just the first year of a rebuild really, so for what they did, it's kind of satisfying. Not many people were expecting them to blow everybody away, but they made the plans, they did enough. That was like their ceiling for a lot of people. They met expectations, so I think they should walk away from this year feeling happy and that they should look forward to what's to come. How about the Paris Eternal now? So, just like with Boston, they weren't expected to shoot for the stars or anything, but they did what they had to. They had a lot of great moments, and their record, I mean, hey, it's a lot better than most people thought it would be, that's for sure. They weren't even the lowest seed in the play-ins. I mean, the fact that they made it there to begin with is insane on its own, but they won a fair amount of games for a team who was expected to suck. I mean, seriously, if you look back at preseason predictions and whatnot, both from me and a lot of other people out there, this roster was widely expected to be one of the worst in the league, and yet they found a way to qualify for the plans as one of the league's most intriguing underdogs to date. I think the people behind the scenes over there did a fantastic job. You know, so much had to change really quick for Paris after such a successful year. They had to completely destroy their culture and basically rebuild it from the ground up, and they did a good job. And a lot of that starts with AWL, the general manager of the Paris Eternal. She deserves a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, because she killed it. She had to do so much. She had a lot of responsibilities on her shoulders, a lot that I probably don't even know about for that matter, and she did great. She had to work a lot of long weeks, and she should feel very proud of herself in particular. I really cannot praise her enough for the job she did, because this Paris Eternal team, they weren't supposed to be good, and she found a way to put out a product that Paris fans can be proud of. Along with her, though, I think that some of the other people behind the scenes, such as the coaching, did a great job too. J-Mac, as well as their head coach, Get Amazed. They were both very underrated coaches, I would say, for the job they did. Very brilliant minds, really good at getting the most out of their players, so good on them. And last but certainly not least, you have to thank the players and the jobs that they did. I think their rookie talent looked really good. A lot of them surpassed their expectations. Somebody like Don, he played a lot better than I thought he would. I thought Dridro did great. Vestola did great. Naga was amazing, Khan was amazing, and then I think that their veterans also did a really good job of leading the rest of the pack. Onigad and Suna, they did wonderful. This combined effort between management, the coaching, and the players led to a dark horse contender type of team that was fun to watch from start to finish, really. The only issue is they did not look that great in their final matchup of the year against the Justice. Maybe it was just them running into the bad team at the worst possible time, but they did play this team closely just a few months prior, so I expected them to at least play a little bit better, but maybe there were some warning signs during the Countdown Cup that they were starting to slow down. They seem to not be playing at that same level we saw previously. They're still respectable, but just not the same team. But I guess that makes sense. They're a young team. They weren't expected to go far to begin with, so the fact that they even did this much is something to definitely be proud of if you're a member of the Paris Eternal or you're a fan of this team. As for the Toronto Defiant, I mean, hey, they did all right. They were able to win a play-in matchup, which is great. I think they ended the year on a pretty solid note. They were winning a lot more games. They looked more competitive. I was happy with what they gave us at the end of the year. There were inconsistencies and everything, but when it came down to it, when it came to crunch time, they played well enough to at least put themselves in a position to make the playoffs. It was a bit closer than the score would suggest, but they did take care of business against Boston, and they lost to the Shock, which is fine, but they gave it their all, so you can't be too mad. They weren't expected to make the playoffs anyway by most people, I would say. They had their ups and downs, but still, this was their best regular season to date. They had 2 3-1 qualifying rounds, and their first ever above 500 win percentage, aka 50%, so that's pretty respectable. They hung around middle of the pack status, which is where most people thought they'd be, so that's great. They played up to expectations, I would say. To sum it up, Toronto were never supposed to be a top-tier threat, but still, they did demand the respect from their opposition. Those who slipped up against them usually ended up suffering the consequences, and that very well could carry over into the future if they decide to maintain this core. And last, but certainly not least, is the Houston Outlaws. Oh, Houston, you're basically the NA version of the Seoul Dynasty. Every opportunity you get ends up slipping away. Although, to be fair, at least the Outlaws put up a fight this time around. Usually in the biggest games of the year for them, they don't play all that well, but this was an exception. They went map 5 with the Justice, and the Justice appeared to be back on the right track, so it's not a terrible loss for them. I gotta say though, there was a weakness that came out that made me start thinking about something that's kind of been apparent throughout the entire year, but I just wasn't thinking about it enough. And that is the fact that the Outlaws really aren't that flexible in-game. For whatever reason, I don't know if it's because of the coach or whatever it is, but they always seem to stick to one composition. They never want to switch to anything else in-game. They stick to their one game plan, and if it works, great, but if it doesn't, then they just stick with it anyway. In the Justice game in particular, we saw Washington go back and forth between dive and rush, but Houston, they decided to stay put on the dive only, whether it be Wrecking Ball or Winston. It was the only thing they were ever trying. They stuck with that Zen Brig for the most part. They'd play Echo, Sombra, Tracer, and that was basically it. This mindset kind of gave the Justice a bunch of different opportunities to play around them, and I don't get why the Outlaws would do that, because we know they're really good at rush comps. They looked like one of the best in the league on it earlier this year, so why not play that as well? Why only stick with the one comp? And like I said, this is a trend that can kind of be noticed throughout the entire year. Anytime they are struggling, they just stick with their game plan no matter what, even if they're getting absolutely demolished. Don't even think about the Justice game where it was close. Think about some of their blowout losses throughout this year. Some of the Dallas games in particular come to mind, where the Fuel would be playing the Winston dive or whatever it is. They'd have a couple of different things, maybe the Reinhardt as well, but the Outlaws would basically just end up sticking with their Orisa composition or whatever it was at the time. They never want to change. They lacked change, and I think that was their biggest problem as to why they could not overcome the Justice. It sucks to see them go out this way. I think for a lot of people, this year was great for the Houston Outlaws. I think a lot of their fans were pleasantly surprised with how much better they were than most outlooks of them, but at the same time, you knew they could have been more than this, so it really sucks to see it end in such a sad way where they probably could have won had they had a slightly better game plan. Overall, though, I am happy with how the Outlaws played. I don't have that many complaints aside from those losses in major games and lack of flexibility, because even a lot of the biggest Houston supporters out there didn't foresee them playing at this level. The Outlaws destroyed their preseason expectations, both from other people and myself, of course. I had some really bad preds about them. I think the addition of veteran talent, new coaching, and rookies alike propelled the Outlaws back into relevance, which is great. They haven't really been respected for a couple of years now, ever since the inaugural season, like early stages of the inaugural season, so this is a nice change of pace. It's been a while since we've seen the Outlaws be near the top. Hopefully this continues, though. No one wants to see the Outlaws get back into that irrelevant hole again. They've been there long enough. Hopefully they continue to make the Outlaws Nation proud. But yeah, that's basically everything I have to say about the play-ins, as well as the teams that won and the teams that lost. So let's look towards the future in a couple of weeks a little bit here as we discuss the playoffs, the little bracket that we have going for ourselves now, and some of the interesting choices made by some of these teams who had the opportunity to pick their first round opposition. The first thing that I have to say is, wow. This bracket on paper is loaded. I mean, this might be the most competitive playoffs we'll ever get. Things aren't nearly as one-sided as they once were. A lot of teams seem to be in contention to win a championship this year, and that's a wonderful thing. That's what we need. More parity. A lot of the time it's been like a 1 or 2 team race in the past, so this is a good change of pace. When it comes to some of these matches, I mean, wow. Right off the bat, the Dragons, the Shanghai Dragons, the #1 team in the league, decided to pick the San Francisco Shock. They could have picked the Reign, who they know a lot about already and have beaten really badly. They could have picked the Fusion or the Justice, who have been a lot more inconsistent, but they went with the Shock. Are the Shock the biggest threat in the playoffs to them? Most people would say no, but are they the weakest team? Definitely not. It's pretty clear that the Dragons aren't playing for the easiest possible schedule. They want to feel confident in themselves. They want the salty run back, as they were saying on the pre-show, where they get revenge on the Shock for what happened in the playoffs last year, where they beat them in 5. On one hand, I respect this pick by Coach Moon and his team. I get it. You want to instill confidence in your group. You want to feel good right at the start. That's how you get your blood pumping. With a feel-good win like this, you get your revenge. You might not have to play the Shock ever again for the rest of the playoffs now because you put them in the losers. You're feeling great if you're the Dragons, if you can beat the Shock. You're probably in a good position to win the finals, I would say, if you do end up beating them. On the other side of it, though, this is a risky decision. Because the Shock are not the weakest team you could have picked, now you're in a situation where you might end up losing it. There's a good chance. And if you do lose this game that's based on a pride pick, then you're going to feel really bad about yourselves, and the Dragons might end up going home very early. Something else I don't like about this is I feel like you're poking the wrong bear. I don't know if the Shock is the team you want to motivate and get angry. They're going to see this as a sign of disrespect. And although they might not be the same as they once were, they still are led by Krusty, and they still do have a lot of those players from those original championships. If the Shock go on a streak, you know who to blame. It's the Dragons' fault. Seriously, this is a very bold decision. Also, in a way, I feel like they're also talking about this on the pre-show. You want to try and get warmed up. The Dragons haven't really played seriously in a long time. They've had a lot of off time. They weren't in the Countdown Cup finals or anything. They were chilling, and now they have to play the Shock in like a do-or-die situation, and the loser ends up going down to the lower bracket. Wouldn't it be better to kind of get the feel of things again by playing the Fusion, let's say, a team you know, a team you have beaten down a couple of times already? That would seem like a good decision to me, but they're going purely off of the pride thing. That is very, very risky. I can't even begin to tell you. Like, clearly, the Dragons are going to be favored in this matchup. They've been the better team all year long. I think they have the advantage with Wrecking Ball compositions. The Shock aren't the greatest with them, nor are they the best at playing against them. But I still just feel kind of nervous about this because it is the Shock. This isn't some ordinary franchise they picked. That's probably the biggest storyline for me heading into the first round, but there's some other interesting matches going on as well. Checking out the other side of the bracket with the 2 seed, the Dallas Fuel have decided to go up against the Washington Justice. And this is one of those picks that makes a bit more sense, I feel like. The Justice are somebody that they know. They're in the same region. They've played them before, and they're confident they can defeat them. And also, most people would argue the Justice are one of the worst teams in the playoffs, so it makes sense to go with them. A team that you're more consistent than, a team that you know well, a team that can help you get warmed up for future rounds. This is a good overall decision by the Fuel. But it is by no means an easy matchup because the Justice could end up getting hot, as I was talking about earlier, and stylistically, they're both going to play some very similar things, so the Justice might end up coming out on top. The Fuel won't have any countermeasures. It all kind of comes down to who's better at the specific mirror, who's going to be the better Winston dive team, who's going to be the better Rhine team, and in both of those scenarios, the Justice might be able to take it. Right now, obviously, I favor the Fuel. I think they're a better team, but I mean, hey, anything can happen. It's one game. This is an epic battle of comfort zones, and I don't think either team would dare to try something that they don't love, such as the Orisa or the Wrecking Ball. I really do think they're going to stick to their guns. So, I mean, coaching could play a big role in this, but also just the overall playmakers. It's going to be a bloodbath seeing somebody like Fearless and Mag go off on the Winston. We've seen them do that already. It was epic. It's probably going to be epic again. The same thing would apply when they play Rhine. Both teams have an insane Diva player on hand in Fury and Hanbin respectively. Both top tier off tanks without a doubt. And then Sparkle and Doha taking on Decay and Assassin, who seems to be reinvigorated. That could be really interesting. There's a lot of cool matchups going on, but the big thing for the Justice, if they want to win, probably comes down to the supports, I would imagine, just because Fielder and Jexay have been better the whole year. So that's the thing you want to look out for the most, aside from the mirror match and the coaching. Look at the supports. It's a big game, and a lot of trash has been talked between the two already. It's going to be a fun one to watch, no doubt about it. If it's anything like some of their previous meetings, then we should all feel pretty excited. Right next to that 2 versus 8 seed game on the same side of the bracket, the Hunters are going to be playing the Atlanta Reign. First off, we could have an Atlanta versus Dallas or Chengdu versus Dallas second round. That's pretty epic. But on top of it, the Hunters picking the Reign over the Fusion kind of goes to show you that they feel pretty confident in this matchup despite knowing the Fusion a lot better. I feel like usually you'd want to pick a team that you at least know kind of well, one from the same region as you, one you're confident you could defeat in like a mirror match, let's say, but with the Hunters, it's actually the opposite. They'd prefer to play someone with a different style from a different region because they feel like those teams don't have as good of an idea of how to stop them compared to the APAC teams. And I mean, they showed they can beat the Reign pretty well during the most recent tournament they played against them and everything. So hey, why not? I kind of support it in a way. It's tough, the Reign are a really good team, but I kind of feel like the Hunters have a better idea of how to stop the Reign than the Reign know how to counter them. Maybe they also think the Reign won't be as effective just because Pelican will technically be on high ping, I believe. He won't be able to travel with the team to Hawaii because of medical issues and everything. So I guess that could be going forward as well. I mean, Pelican showed he can be good on ping and everything, but hey, any advantage you can get with Leave over Pelican, you're going to take. It should be a fun matchup for sure. These are probably the two teams with the most different styles, so when those things clash, it'll probably lead to a really epic matchup. I'm assuming it could end up being one of those scenarios where it's not very close, but just seeing how the two sides go up against one another when they play so differently, that'll be a treat to watch. Something to note about the Hunter selection is technically this wasn't their first choice. I believe they wanted the Justice. That's what it kind of seemed like when they were talking about it on the pre-show. They wanted the Justice more. They didn't outright say it, but they said their first option was off the table, and that was right after the Fuel picked the Justice, so I'm assuming that is who they originally wanted. Either way, whether they picked the Justice or the Reign, it seemed that the Hunters wanted to go up against someone who was not from their region. These APAC teams really do not want to reveal their strategies yet against teams that are from their same region. They want to avoid those guys. No one wants to play Philly. Not the Dragons, not the Hunters. They've beaten them time and time again, but no, they want nothing to do with them. Honestly though, you won't hear me complain because that just means we get more inter-regional play, stuff that we haven't gotten a lot of this year, so that's fantastic. We get new potential matchups to look forward to. I talked about how the Hunters and the Fuel could be playing each other, but also think about the other side of the bracket. We could have the Dragons playing the Gladiators for the first time. The Dragons and Shock are about to play each other. You could even see the Shock and Fusion play each other, either in the winners or the losers round after this first game, so that's pretty neat. There's still one other matchup to talk about though before we end the video, and that is the Gladiators versus the Fusion. That is one I was not expecting to see. I did not believe the Gladiators were going to be lucky enough to play one of the more inconsistent teams in the bracket. I thought for sure they were either playing the Reign or the Shock, which would have been a really tough matchup either way because both of those teams have pushed the Gladiators to their limits this year. But no. They are getting, arguably, at least on paper, one of the bottom two teams coming into the playoffs. That's the dream right there. However, this won't be an easy matchup by any stretch because for one, again, it's more inter-regional play. Those types of matchups can be really hard to do. But also, the Fusion, they can be kind of scary. They're a dark horse, no doubt about it, because they can match the Gladiators a lot talent-wise. They both have really good support lines. Alarm can match Shu, he definitely can. Carpe versus Birdring, that's going to be insane. There's a lot of interesting and evenly matched players there. What the outcome of this game comes down to most likely is the Fusion and that consistency factor of theirs. If they can look confident out there, maybe Carpe, let's say, wants to continue that revenge tour of his by beating Birdring, another guy who defeated him in the 2018 Grand Finals, then maybe the Fusion have a shot at pushing the Glads or even beating them. But at the same time, I'm a little worried because what if they suddenly hit another mental barrier? What if they lose their way again? Then the Glads will destroy them. Everything looks great for the Fusion right now. They're feeling confident, they got a couple of feel-good wins, everything's great right now, they're at the top of the world, but a couple of weeks are going to go by here. Anything can happen in between then and now, so there's kind of reason to still be concerned if you're a Fusion fan. You're not out of the woods by any means. They're going up against a team who has come into their own recently. It's not like with the Dynasty or the Spark. The Gladiators look really solid right now. They're at the top of the world. They really do seem like a genuine threat to the rest of the league right now. They're just coming off their first franchise tournament victory ever, something the Fusion still have not done. So I don't really know. This is going to be a tough one for the Fusion. However, I gotta say, that time variable I talked about with Philly could play out for the Glads, or any of these other teams for that matter. A couple of weeks can change a lot, you know? You gotta travel, you gotta practice, you might lose your confidence, and if any of that stuff happens, the Fusion might be able to strike. The Glads have to travel to Hawaii after all, and that can take a lot out of you. It's not easy to do that type of thing. So, if the Fusion can press the advantage, they might end up winning this thing and potentially going on a crazy run. And yeah, that's my final preview for the tournament matchups that we're going to be looking forward to in a couple of weeks. So just to sum up some of the big things, the big takeaways as to what could play an impact on these tournaments, one is traveling for me. That could be a big thing for the NA teams who have to go over to Hawaii. But also I'm looking at the stylistic differences between the two regions. That's something we've talked about before in regular season tournaments, and I think that applies here as well. Overall, this tournament bracket looks sick. There are so many possibilities going on. Some of these matchups are super intriguing, and if we're being honest, a lot of these teams did not pick the quote-unquote easiest match available, and that only makes things more interesting and gives us more potential for some epic storylines. Anyway, that's just about going to do it for this video. I'm sorry for dragging it out for so long, but there was so much on my mind, and it ended up being more like a fun podcast episode, so I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, it would mean so much to me if you could give this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for watching this video. I appreciate your support so much, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.